Genealogical Society requested that I do this presentation today for Valentine's Day. It was my idea to do a talk on divorce, but they thought that was enough. So they requested multiple marriages instead. And the funny thing is that I was at a party last night for a friend of mine that was a surprise party for her birthday. And I was talking to one of the gentlemen at the party, and I said, well, I'm giving a talk on multiple marriages. And he goes, you mean polygamy? And I said, no, one right after the other. And he said, and I said, well, you know, it's about entangling that. And he goes, well, I would expect you do that one at a time. I thought that was brilliant. I was so pleased with that answer. So I thought I'd share it with you. But I have some lovely ladies, and of course they're not actually married to the same man, but I thought they looked really good. So we're going to start with what is marriage, because when you're studying something, you need to understand really what it's all about. What's the whole point of it? And so I decided first to look it up in the dictionary. And of course, Webster had a definition that said the state of being united to a person of the opposite sex as husband or wife in consensual and contractual relationship. Now I want to stop there. That's the point. Marriage is essentially a contract between two individuals, or actually two families if you want to look at it that way, because you're actually marrying two families into one another. And it is recognized by law. It has to be recognized by law in order to be valid. So it's also known as an institution. Now, of course, on Facebook this week, I did a little blog, and I said, oh, I'm doing this talk on multiple marriages. Could you share with me what your definition of marriage is? Well, you can imagine some of the responses I got. Rob Tanner, a friend of mine from high school, said something about being sentenced to death. Jeff Elliott talked about the world's smallest handcuff. But my favorite was a quote from Mark Twain. And you might know this, recognize this. It says, both marriage and death ought to be welcomed. One promises happiness and the other assures it. Wonder which one. Patty Schultz from Pasco Genealogy Society said that it was a mutual misunderstanding. And Ginny Lane Miller said, marriage, like compromise, is the state of mutual dissatisfaction. But really, marriage for love was not done back from the Middle Ages on down to the 1800s. It was only until the 1800s that a woman could actually make a choice as to her suitor, actually refuse a suitor. So we have to understand that the whole idea about being married is more of a business transaction, a contractual obligation, a merging of families, that sort of thing. So in understanding that it's more of a business transaction than anything else, we can go forward with analyzing why did he marry her, what was the purpose, what was the point. And the Catholic Church had this theory about marriage that when men and women come together under the eyes of God and make this contract, they become one person, one united person. They are no longer looked at as two entities. And that is why they don't believe in divorce, because nothing done by man can tear that apart. It has to be done by God, or it has to have been entered into in an incorrect way in the first place. So when back in 1215, the Catholic Church declared a private promise made between two individuals as the verbum, and it was like a positive present tense, like I marry you. And that could not be unbroken, except by annulment, and annulment is, of course, if you've gone into it on an incorrect assumption in the first place. It was not a state affair. Things were not recorded by the state at this time, and it could be private. A priest didn't have to be present. In 1545, that changed, and I'm going to share a little story. I mean, everybody knows the story of Henry VIII, right? He had 6 wives, and, well, his life changed the way the Catholic Church did things as much as it changed the way church was in general. I mean, he created his own church, the Anglican Church. It was basically based off Catholicism, except you could get divorced. But there were 2 things that happened to him, 2 women, I should say, that happened to him. The first was Anne Boleyn. And she was secretly betrothed without a priest present to Henry Percy in 1522. That was, of course, broken by Cardinal Wolsey, but it doesn't matter who broke it, whether he was a part of the church or not. That was verbum. That was a marriage in the eyes of the church. So then she marries Henry VIII in 1533 and becomes queen. Well, when he decides he wants to set her aside and he wants a new one, he can't necessarily divorce her because, then it would make it look like the whole thing he did was invalid. So he has to find a reason to get rid of her, and he decided that it would be adultery. So he found out about her pre-contract to Henry Percy, and he threw in a couple of other guys in the meantime, and he said, okay, we are being executed in 1536 for adultery. And she didn't have sex with all those other gentlemen. She was actually innocent of that, but she was not innocent of the betrothal to Henry Percy, although he never gave her up for that. Catherine Howard, who was a cousin of Anne Boleyn, was his fifth wife, and she secretly betrothed to Frances Dereham, who later became her secretary when she was queen. In 1540, she betrothed herself to Thomas Culpeper, and then in 1542, she was, of course, executed. So knowing this information, and that somebody so high up was affected by these secret betrothals in private, the Council of Trent decided that only a valid marriage could be determined if a priest and 2 witnesses were present. So no more of this private stuff. Somebody has to be present, because when the king got taken for granted twice, something's got to change. Even though he was no longer Catholic by this time, he was excommunicated.